My presentation is based on an article that I had published in 2009 in the Jewish Educational Leadership Journal, which is published by the Lookstein Center for Jewish Education. During the Yellow Star, people always made fun of me. Hitler probably didn't only make us wear yellow stars because he thought it would make us feel like subjects. He probably also made it so the people on the street would know who to make fun of and throw rocks at. Soon, it's probably going to be who to shoot. I want to escape before that happens. This is an excerpt from the final project of one of my fifth graders in 2010. So to start, a little bit of history of teaching the Holocaust at the Jewish Day School in Seattle where I teach. And the controversial nature of teaching the Shoah to fifth graders was not well known to me when in 2007 I was asked to teach fifth grade. I knew it had been taught previously, but not by the most recent teacher, and I was actually quite familiar with this situation as I had long-term subbed for my predecessor the previous year and had done a short Holocaust unit while she was out. She was quite irate when she returned, and the students had an outstanding assignment that I thought I would still be there for when it was due, and instead she was back and she refused to grade it. So she was quite firm in her opposition to it being taught. So when I was asked by the head of Judaics to renew the teaching of it in fifth grade, I began to do some research and to have some conversations with my colleagues. And there were very strong opinions. Words such as pedagogically unsound and developmentally inappropriate were quite often used in these discussions. But I thought, considering all the gore and violence that my students are exposed to on a daily basis in TV, video games, movies, and books, I found it quite hard to believe that there was not a way to teach the Shoah in fifth grade that would be both pedagogically sound and developmentally appropriate. So armed with both the concerns of my colleagues and my own conviction, I began to put together a curriculum for my classroom that would teach my students about this important time in Jewish history and help to create in them the sense of urgency necessary to ensure that such crimes were not repeated. For me, teaching the Shoah isn't just about teaching the horrific history of what happened in Germany and Europe in the Third Reich. It's about creating young people who understand that it can be a few short steps from name-calling to genocide, that prejudice isn't harmless, and that propaganda and a good orator can lead people to do horrible things. To create students who know what it looks like when the world goes terribly wrong and who will stand up and do something about it. With this in mind, I set out to create my own unique curriculum for teaching the Shoah to fifth graders. On this slide are the three main components of my curriculum, which I'll describe in detail as we progress. I knew that I needed to teach about the history of Germany from 1933 to 1939, as this is the time period which history could have changed, but didn't. This decision was reaffirmed when I took the Holocaust in Human Behavior through Facing History in Ourselves the summer of 2008 after having taught my curriculum for a year, and they stated, if you teach nothing else, teach 33 to 39. To hear that I had focused on the right historical period confirmed what I already knew from the work of my students. Understanding what happened to create a world where the Shoah could happen was vital if we were to keep it from occurring again. And 33 to 39 is the time period that teaches the lessons of what it looks like when society is becoming intolerant and the government is working to dehumanize and delegitimize part of the population. By knowing what these actions look like, my students are made aware of what they should be on guard for in their own communities and their own country. Being aware, rather than just letting things happen to or around you, is a major step towards preventing things from happening again. An informed population is more difficult to control. People aware of what hatred, prejudice, and scapegoating look like are less likely to sit idly by while it happens. I also learned from Facing History in Ourselves the idea of creating upstanders. An upstander takes action when a wrong is being done rather than being a bystander and allowing it to happen unchallenged. This is now a byword in my class and a goal of my Shoah curriculum to create upstanders who, based on their knowledge of this history, will work to assure that it is not repeated. It is even now a part of our school mission statement. JDS redid their mission statement a year and a half ago, and being an upstander is now an official part of our school mission. And students are taught about being upstanders in school when faced with bullying and negative peer behavior. The comment at the bottom, encouraging outrage, and well, now I'm outraged. Last year when I was teaching 7th grade, I had students I had previously taught in 5th grade, and we were talking about an activity they were doing considering should the U.S. pay reparations to survivors and their descendants of the SS St. Louis. And one of my students said to me, "Why are we even talking about this? Surely something was done after the war to make this right." And I said, "No, nothing has been done." And he quite vehemently said, "Well, now I'm outraged." And it was really nice to see that what I had taught them in 5th grade really had kind of stuck, and that they knew when they should be outraged. It was really nice to see that 2 years down it was still there. So my unit begins with a tuning in activity, and we begin by reading the book Viva la Paris by Esme Raji Kodel. And tuning in is a pedagogical process that allows the students to access a topic in a way that's relevant and meaningful for them, so bringing it into their lives and into some schema that they can relate to. This book is the story of Paris, an African-American 5th grade girl in Chicago, so the same age as my students, and her Jewish piano teacher, Mrs. Rosen, who is a survivor. And this wonderful book not only introduces the Shoah through the eyes of Paris, but also shows the prejudices she herself faces, countered to those that Mrs. Rosen had faced. And we discuss the similar experiences of blacks and Jews, the evils of prejudice, and how life experiences impact faith. I absolutely love this book, and I cry each time I read some of the passages, even though I've read them many times before. And watching Paris discover how much she's misunderstood. She thinks Mrs. Rosen's in a gang because she has a tattoo, and gangs have tattoos. She mistakes the yellow star with the French for Jew written on it, meaning she thought it was Jeff and it was Mrs. Rosen's boyfriend. So there's these beautiful misunderstandings that then lead to her understanding this horrific history. So it's a great way for the kids to tune into that. We then move on to reading stories of child survivors from a book called Survivors, Stories of Children Who Survived the Holocaust. It's published by Scholastic. And after that, the students choose a book for an individual book project. And this brings me to my main guideline for stories that are read for my class. The main character must survive. This is based on the concern that forming an attachment to a character and then having them die is too hard emotionally for 5th graders. This means that Anna Frank's diary could not be read for a book report in my class, even though many of the students have already read it. And teaching the stories of survivors makes it clear to students that the person will be okay. From the outset, they know that. I make it very clear this is a story of someone who survived. And in the words of one of the teachers at Yad Vashem, where I studied this past summer, helps to bring them in safely and bring them out safely. No matter how bad things get, they know this person survived. Throughout the year, starting with Viva la Paris and the whole way through the end of the year, my students keep a Shoah journal. And this is, they write their thoughts, they answer questions, they write questions that they themselves have, and there are private conversation and are not shared without the students' permission, which is why I don't have any to share with you. It is here where the real growth and understanding develops on these hard topics, and it's here where I see beautiful evidence of the deep thinking of my students. They write questions. I've had students write poems in there. It's their gut reactions. They might draw illustrations for the story that I'm reading as I'm reading it. Some students write me pages and pages, and others are so dumbstruck that they can't write much of anything. I've had conversations about faith, the existence of God, human nature, and what it took for these people to survive and whether my students think they would have been able to survive. I've had, responding to each journal is a very time-consuming activity, but it's extremely worthwhile and an important part of achieving my goal of creating upstanders. The next process is a lesson on the power of hate, which I do so that the students will be able to process the events they're about to study in an informed manner. I use the Pyramid of Hate, which was made by ADL and the survivors of the Shoah Visual History Foundation, to teach about the various levels of hate and show just how few steps there are between prejudice and genocide. Armed with this frame of reference, the students are then able to study the events of 1933 to 39 in Germany and see the unfolding climb up the Pyramid of Hate towards genocide. At the Facing History seminar, I learned, and have also read it's not true, that a frog will jump out of a pot of boiling water, but if placed in a pot of cold water, will allow itself to be boiled to death. This is an apt illustration of what happened to both Jews and Germans during these years. Having this framework allows the students to see the slow boil and perhaps understand why the Jews didn't leave earlier. It doesn't excuse, but helps to explain why Germans went along with a leader step by step dehumanizing the Jews, and creating a society where the Shoah occurred largely unquestioned. Having this framework helps make the study of these events relevant and interesting by showing how each of Hitler's new laws is another step on the way to genocide or up the pyramid of hate. The students can see the systematized nature of genocide as it progresses. So these are the 4 time periods we then study. And when we study these time periods, we use the writings of young people who lived through this period. We read diary entries and story excerpts, and these allow the students to form their own impression of these events and also learn from those who did experience them. So the 2 books that I used to put together my packets are Through Our Eyes, Children Witness the Holocaust by Itzhak Teitelbaum, which is published by Yad Vashem, and then The Holocaust, A History of Courage and Resistance are the 2 places where I do that. As the students read these things, they have to respond to some thinking questions, both about what they read and then thinking beyond that. So something might be factual, different descriptions of the stars in the diary entries, so how stars were different in different communities, down to how does labeling someone change how they feel about themselves, and does it matter if it's a good or a bad label, and are all labels inherently negative? The Shoah character narrative, which is the final project of my curriculum, is based on an original assignment that was created by the head of Judaics at my school. I altered this original assignment to limit the story to 1933 to 39, rather than have it continue through the camps and crematoria as it previously had, which meant students were creating characters and writing about them being murdered. Like my predecessor, I agreed that this was not developmentally appropriate for 5th grade. The character each child creates only experiences the events of 33 to 39 and not the camps and mass killings of the 40s. In keeping with my requirement for stories which we read in class, the character must survive, and many of the narratives are written as memoirs. And the events that they have to include, they have to write a backstory, life prior to Hitler, election, boycott, impacts of the rules about the Jews being in public schools, Nuremberg laws dealing with what does it mean to be a citizen versus a subject. Did they understand that at whatever age they were, experiencing Kristallnacht, finding out they're going to have to wear a yellow star, and then what was the impact of going into public wearing that. So to create our characters, we use what I call a reverse identity circle. Usually this is something I got from Facing History and Ourselves, and usually you use it to kind of pull apart an existing person's identity. We use this to create a character, and we start with this blank circle and create the pieces of the character's identity. They have to give their character a name, which must sound German and Jewish, parents, a birthplace and date, siblings, a school, do they go to public school or a Jewish school, level of Jewish observance, hobbies, and economic class. They have fairly free rein in this process, other than that their character must be Jewish, live in Germany, and be at least 8 in 1933. They then write a backstory to introduce their character and show what their life was like prior to the election of Hitler in January 1933, because the life prior is also very important. While the minimum requirement is 14 paragraphs, most students write much more. I've had students, these are 5th graders, write me 16, 17, 18-page papers, stories that they've written. They create a whole world and life for their character, which is then impacted by the realities of being a Jew in Germany during this time period. The resulting stories show a command of the history, an understanding of what it was like to live through these events, and a sense of not wanting this for anyone else. So these are my collections of the stories. This assignment also creates a memory for the student writer, a memory of living in Germany in the 1930s. And it's this memory that I now have come to believe will most help these young people grow up into upstanders, working to make our world a more peaceful and equitable place. And this belief is based on a connection to Shabbat, which is said more than Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews. And the Shoah requires not just remembering, but guarding. For those of you who aren't familiar, the command for Shabbat is given twice. The first time it's Zachor, remember. The second time it's Shemor, guard. And so why does that change? And I see guarding as active remembering. Guarding as forming our own memories of events we did not live through, so that when those who did live through them are gone, we don't forget what they suffered. On Passover each year, Jews say, "My father was a wandering Aramean. I went out of Egypt." Jews today no more did those things than my 5th graders lived through the Shoah. But by guarding the memory in an active and personal way, we have made Passover the most universally observed Jewish holiday. Using this same technique of creating personal memories of historical events, we can make the lessons of the Shoah part of the mindset of every young Jew.